talked a lot about the Mariners bullpen over the course of the offseason, and today we'll dive in a little bit more. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Wednesday, February 26, 2025. This is Hiding Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's another position preview day today. We're going to be looking at the Mariners bullpen, but before we do, a reminder as always, if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, you can check out our Patreon. All you have to do to check that out is click the link in the description of this episode. So the Mariners are going to break camp with 8 relievers in their bullpen. They always operate with 13 pitchers on their roster. They've never shown interest in carrying 14 or more position players on their roster. And we've said time and time again that if it were up to them, they would carry fewer position players and more pitchers, but that's not what the rules allow. So so it's going to be an 8-man bullpen. And right now, looking at things, seems like all of those 8 spots are accounted for. It's going to be Andres Munoz. It's going to be Gregory Santos, Colin Snyder, Edward Bizardo, Trent Thornton, Taylor Saucedo, Gabe Spire, and Troy Taylor. Now, Taylor hasn't thrown yet since being cleared to throw from, or he hasn't pitched in a game yet since being cleared to throw following his lat strain that he suffered during off-season workouts. So maybe there's an opportunity there for a spot to be up for grabs, at least as far as opening day is concerned. But I don't know. You would think that Taylor should be able to get into some actual game action here relatively soon if he was cleared to throw a couple weeks ago or a week and a half ago, whenever it was. So if all 8 spots are actually accounted for, like I think they might very well be, that doesn't leave any room for all these pile arms that the Mariners seem to be also pretty excited about, like guys like Casey Legumina and Hunter Cranton and Brandon Garcia and Shintaro Fujinami and guys like that. So before we actually dive into the guys that we know for sure are going to be a part of this bullpen in 2025, I want to circle back to a conversation that you and I had on our Patreon last week. Do you think that any of these guys could get traded to make room for one of those pile arms before the end of spring? Or in addition to that, do you think there is someone that maybe we're assuming is going to make the bullpen that maybe the Mariners don't view them as favorably?
So I think the possibility of a trade always exists. Every year we see this kind of like small flurry of moves made at the end of camp. As teams, try to finalize their 26-man and, oh, hey, this guy didn't make the team. He's out of options. We could just DFA him. Or, we could shop him around, see if we can make a move. I do think that it's definitely possible one of these guys gets traded. Kind of the guy that I've zeroed in on as a guy who might have some trade value and might end up on the outside looking in of this race, who is also out of options, would be Trent Thornton, who's making $2 million this year. So the Mariners can move him. There's a nice little bonus of like saving $2 million, which shouldn't matter, but we know it does. I think it's possible. Now, when you make these types of trades, you're making one of 2 types of trades. You're either making the Ryan Stanek for Ryland Thomas trade, which is like you get nothing. Yeah. But like an older prospect who's barely a prospect, and you're just like, maybe he becomes a useful bench piece for us. So you're either making that trade, or you're making a trade where it's like, you find somebody else's Trent Thornton who happens to be a better fit for your roster. So for the Mariners, maybe that's like a utility infielder, and you trade Trent Thornton for, his mirror image, I guess you would call it, just, on the offense side of things.
Yeah, his utility equivalent or what have you.
Right. And again, it's not going to be a lot. Thornton is a valuable major leaguer, but he's not. I think most teams feel like they have a Trent Thornton in their organization, and so you're not going to get a ton for him either way. But yes, those types of trades do happen. The Mariners have made them in the past. I believe Mike Montgomery was one when he was traded on like the day before they broke camp and all that stuff. So yes, we do see it sometimes. And I think this year there's a chance that it happens, a little bit more frequency than it has in the past couple of years, as every team is kind of trying to compete a little bit right now, and minor upgrades to their roster could be interesting. Also, it's possible that the Mariners put a bullpen arm on the block and we're kind of surprised by how much they get. And it's probably not a major leaguer coming back in that sense, but it's like, hey, wow, Trent Thornton got this number 19 prospect out of the system who's in like A ball. And you're like, oh, wow. I mean, that's somewhat surprised because we know how, suppressed the market is right now in prospects. So yeah, it's possible that the Mariners could make a trade for one of the trade from their bullpen, particularly if they really feel strongly that Brash and Coar are going to come back before, June, which it sounds like they are basically banking on. At that stage, you're probably DFAing one of these guys anyways. And so, yeah, to, trade, I'm just using Thornton as an example, that you trade him, you give his spot to somebody who has minor league options. And then when Brash is ready, you can just send that guy down and put Brash up, and you don't have to DFA anybody. So yeah, it's certainly possible. Short of finding that type of trade though, I think these are the 8 guys. Like, I don't think that they're just going to DFA Trent Thornton. I think it's trade him or keep him. I don't think they're going to DFA Gabe Spire. I don't think they're going to DFA Bizzardo. I think they really like what they saw from him at the end of last year. So maybe Sauce gets sent down. I think Sauce has one option left. I could be mistaken there, but maybe Sauce gets sent down. But it does feel like the Mariners want to have 2 lefties. And to me, none of the guys in the pile that are really fighting for a roster spot are left-handed. Pomerantz hasn't been bad, hasn't looked bad his first couple outings, but I think they probably want to see more and see him be healthy. So yeah, I think Thornton could be the odd man out, but if it is, it's because he's traded, not because they're going to DFA him.
With how much they're talking about Casey Legumina over these first couple of weeks, do you think that that would be the guy that they try to make room for if they do make a trade, or they do cut one of these guys or send one of them down?
I mean, he seems to be the guy who's generating the most hype from like the Mariners' own words, but I don't know. I mean, I think he's only pitched in the one game, and I did see that outing, and I wasn't overly impressed. So I don't. Not quite sure what all the hype is about, but yeah, it does seem like he is probably the favorite, and he's on the 40-man also. So yeah, I feel like if you're asking like who's the 9th guy or who's the guy, if Taylor's just not quite ready on opening day, who's the guy who's going to take his spot? I would say it would probably be Legumina, just based on how they're kind of building him up. But yeah, I think. Again, I didn't really see anything that made me go, wow, but I've only seen him pitch the one time. Right. And I haven't seen the bullpens, and I don't know what their plan is with it. Well, I kind of know what they're going to try and do with him, we just don't know if it's going to work. And again, we're not seeing the bullpens or anything like that. And so it's real tough to tell from just one outing. But yeah, it does feel like Legumina is probably like the 9th guy in that bullpen right now.
Things are going to get really interesting though, if say all these guys stay healthy and, they are performing relative to what you expect out of them once Matt Brash is ready to come back, once Jackson Coar is ready to come back. Seems like they really like Coar. We'll talk about those guys a little bit more and just dive into the rest of this unit in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk or on a road trip or just need a quick protein boost, they're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. You're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. We are previewing the 2025 Mariners bullpen. Just talked about some of the pile arms and if the Mariners could make some room for those guys with like a trade or maybe an unexpected cut or option down to AAA. They only have a couple of guys that are actually eligible for that. But yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about Casey Legumina being potentially the ninth guy, if you will, the guy that would benefit the most from someone exiting. Maybe it's also Hagen Danner, but we haven't really heard about Hagen Danner. We've heard a lot about Casey Legumina out of camp. So it seems like that's the guy that they've really zeroed in on, that they really like, that they've kind of identified as maybe that next guy that they essentially pull out of thin air that we've talked about. So we'll see. But let's just talk about this unit as a whole. It was a weird year in 2024 for this Mariners bullpen. They actually got too much in the offseason last year, like we had been pounding the table for, right? They went out, they traded for Gregory Santos. They went out and they signed Ryan Stanek, and then that all just kind of fell apart pretty much immediately. Brash gets hurt. Obviously, he requires the surgery. Gregory Santos isn't healthy once he gets to camp, and he gets set back a billion times over the course of the year. We hardly see him. Ryan Stanek ends up becoming basically the second guy for a little while, and we know how that went, and he ends up getting traded. A lot fell on Andres Munoz's shoulders in 2024.
Yep. Say it with me, guys. You can never have enough pitching.
Really can't. You really cannot. And 2024 was the biggest testament to that. This bullpen, though, they weren't asked to do a whole lot. They were the only bullpen in all of baseball to cover fewer than 500 innings. They managed fine-ish over the course of the year. They ended up, discovering Colin Snyder. Troy Taylor eventually came up. He helped quite a bit. But this bullpen, basically from August on, was a problem. Especially, it kind of became the team's biggest problem once Dan Wilson took over, because at that point, when Ed Negger took over the offense, at that point, the offense was actually pretty solid from Wilson's first game to the end of the season. But the bullpen struggled quite a bit. The bullpen from August... Yeah, the bullpen from August 1st onward was worth negative 0.62 win probability added. They were at 24th in that mark. And again, Andres Munoz was asked to do a lot last year. I mean, I've mentioned this before, but like it is ridiculous. And it's worth mentioning that he was asked to complete a foul save in the second game of the season. And he was asked to do that quite a few more times over the course of the year. And he wound up being an all-star. He was awesome last year. Andres Munoz was great, but yeah, he can't do it all by himself, as we saw last year.
Yeah, I believe he had 12 4-out outings last year, which is, a big number, and it is especially for Munoz, who's never really had to do it before. And obviously Munoz dealt with, some back issues last year. He didn't pitch in the last series of the year because he had a little bit of elbow soreness. Obviously the bullpen, they kind of got a pass last year because the offense was so bad for so long that even after the problematic part of this ball club flipped in August, people were still focusing on the offense. And, I can't even blame them really, because that's how bad it was for 4 or 5 months. But the bullpen was not good last year. And in fact, with a healthy Matt Brash, or even just one more guy to help Munoz last year, this club, even with that terrible offense, probably makes the playoffs last year. Like, the bullpen here is very important, especially in Seattle. You're going to play a lot of tight games. You're going to play a lot of low scoring games. Your offense is not equipped to score runs in bunches late in the game. you have to, when you have a lead, you have to keep it. And so the bullpen in Seattle is super important because of their offensive limitations, because of the ballpark they play in. The bullpen has to be lights out. And I mean, it doesn't have to be number one in baseball, but it's kind of got to be top 10. And last year, it just simply was not.
Let's talk about Munoz. 11.68 Ks per nine last year, 3.94 walks per nine, 2.12 ERA, 3.35 FIP, 2.98 xFIP, 0.7 F4. He was an all-star, like I mentioned. Over 59 and a third innings pitched. And again, a lot on his plate. I want to attack the Munoz discussion from two angles here. One, if this kick change is actually a thing, what could that do for him if it's actually as nasty as advertised? And then if it's not, if it's something that he doesn't feel comfortable deploying with any sort of regularity in games, just how do you feel about Munoz going from pretty much what he was last year into this year?
It's really a bonus pitch if he has it, which is great. But yeah, I mean, you still feel really good about him. You just don't want him to be asked to get, 4 or 5 outs, a couple times a month. You really want to limit that. And you especially don't want that happening in April, May, June. You kind of want to save that for down the stretch. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think if that pitch isn't real, I mean, regardless if that pitch is like a real part of his arsenal or not in 2025, I mean, you still shouldn't use him as much as you did last year. You shouldn't have him pitch every single high leverage spot.
No, I guess more so my question on that front is like, well, one, we've talked about this more so with regards to like Adonis Medina. Like this bullpen doesn't really have a changeup, like an actual really good changeup to give Dan Wilson another lever to pull. So if Munoz has this changeup, I mean, that adds an element that the bullpen just doesn't have, mm-hmm. right? But also could, like, again, if it's as nasty as advertised, could this be the thing that takes Munoz from being like a top 10 reliever, top 15 reliever, however you feel about him, to being like one of the best?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, I do think that there is kind of the question of like, well, how much better can he actually be? I mean, right. Munoz is, now again, he's not like Emmanuel Clase. Now, if you only watch the playoffs, Clase is the worst pitcher in baseball, but that is not who he is. He's actually pretty good. Really good. Yeah, like probably the best. Can he be that guy? Is the changeup the only thing preventing him from being that guy? Maybe, but maybe not. I mean, is it just like, yeah, it's a nice added weapon, but there's still concerns about Munoz sometimes loses the strike zone, and sometimes, the slider's flat and he has to rely on just the 4-seamer. And, he also has a 2-seamer now, a sinker that he's mixed in there a little bit more. So yeah, I mean, if this thing is legit and it's a pitch that he feels comfortable throwing on a regular enough basis that hitters have to start kind of respecting it, mm-hmm. then could it be the thing that, takes him from all-star to like the elite of the elite relievers? Yeah, it's certainly possible it could be. Could he just make that step without the changeup though? Yeah, I think he actually still could make that step. Okay. Munoz is still a pretty young guy. But I do, my concern for Munoz this year is not about performance or anything like that. It is about, can they get him help so that he can stay healthy throughout the year? And I know he didn't hit the IL or anything last year, but there were, stretches where he was just unavailable.
The back thing that happened in Oakland.
He was just unavailable for 4 or 5 days at a time. Yeah. And he was your only high leverage guy. So yeah, Munoz, if the kick change is legit and he can throw it in games and throw it with confidence and get some more whiffs on it, then in theory, that makes his fastball play up more. That makes his slider play up more. So yeah, he could absolutely take that next step. But until I see it in games for myself, until I see how hitters react to it, it's just kind of a theoretical upgrade that might be available to him. But it is a pitch that has generated a tremendous amount of buzz in camp. And the reaction from his teammates seem to tell you a little bit about how good they think it is. So yeah, is the kick change going to change everything for Munoz? Like, no, I mean, he's already one of the 10, 15 best. Could he go from top 10 to top 5?
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So Who do you think Gregory Santos ultimately is? This is a question that I feel stumped by, because I'm not sure if I should feel the exact same way that I did when they acquired him last year and pretty much have the same expectations that I did heading into 2024 when I thought that he was healthy. Where do you land right now with Santos?
I think stuff-wise, he is kind of a classic eighth inning setup man guy. Now, I think there's still more swing and miss here because the repertoire that he has does suggest that there should be more strikeouts in his game. But as we know, Santos is a very heavy ground ball guy. So I wonder if he's not likely going to miss bats at an elite level, which is kind of important or required to be an elite reliever in today's game. But I do think he can be a very good, still high leverage guy. Maybe, I mean, he's not Matt Brash or Andres Munoz, but he might be in that level right below it. But there are questions here. He wasn't amazing when he was healthy last year. Now, you could argue whether or not he was ever really healthy last year, but we did see the stuff too when, he only, I think, made 8 appearances, I believe 7 or 8. And in all of those appearances, regardless of how he looked, you could see the stuff. Like the raw stuff is really impressive. It's 98 to 100 with a sinker and a pretty good slider. So I feel reasonably comfortable giving Santos high leverage opportunities right out of the gate. And I do think that he is a high leverage quality arm. I just think it's a little bit different with Brash and Munoz, like runners on second and third, 1 out. You're going to those guys over Santos because they're going to get swing and miss. Santos is going to induce contact, and contact could score a run. So to me, Santos's ideal role is clean inning, 8th, 7th, whatever, 9th even sometimes. And just, whatever. It doesn't matter if you hit a ground ball because it's not going to score a run. So yeah, I do feel relatively comfortable with Santos, but there still are absolutely questions about exactly what type of pitcher he is, because again, he's been great once in his entire career. So yeah, it's fair to question, like, what are we actually going to get out of this guy?
You're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. So Colin Snyder was essentially the Paul Sewald, Justin Topa, etc. revelation of the year for the Mariners. Mariners typically have at least one of those guys that they seemingly pluck out of thin air, and Snyder was that guy. So my question is very simply, can he do it again? 1.94 ERA last year, 3.41 FIP. He was worth half a win, 10.15 Ks per 9, 2.81 walks per 9, and 41 2/3 of an innings pitched. Now, those numbers that I just read to you, Colby, are leaps and bounds ahead of what he's done in his major league career. So, again, I ask you, can he do this for a second year?
Yeah, probably not going to repeat the ERA. That's kind of a once in a career type of thing, and for most players. And I don't think Snyder has that stuff that is just going to allow you to repeat that type of success over and over again. But as the person who recommended Colin Snyder to Jerry Dipoto, it is definitely a feather in my cap if he can't do it a second time. Now, you would think that with that track record, Jerry would trust me again and go out and get, I don't know, one of my other boys like Curtis Mead or somebody like that. But whatever.
He got you Austin Sutton.
Yeah. But I mean,
and he got me Donovan Solano.
Yeah, I feel like I'd probably rather have Curtis Mead, but
the problem is those are like the only things he did this offseason. But this isn't an offseason discussion episode. We're talking about the bullpen.
You want to see me make it one? But yeah,
I know. I don't doubt your ability to do that.
So yeah, the Snyder thing is interesting. Obviously, the hope is that once you get Brash back and hopefully Gabe Spire is healthy and Santos is healthy, then you don't need Snyder to be that high leverage guy. That's the hope, at least. But yeah, I do think he's earned some trust from this from the front office, but also from Dan Wilson and company. And I do think that he'll be, I could see him being that all important pivot guy that the Mariners try to identify every year, the guy who bridges the gap between when the starter comes out of the game and getting to the bullpen. JT Chargois has done that in the past. Justin Topa started out doing that. Drew Steckenrider was that guy. Like, it's a very important role for the Mariners. And I think Snyder is pretty well suited to be that guy, which, it's not high leverage, but it's right below that in terms of like the importance. And sometimes it does end up being a high leverage spot. So yeah, I think Snyder, can he do what he did last year? I think that's asking an awful lot. Can he be an effective major league bullpen arm and be trusted to handle some tight situations when, a couple other guys are down for the day? Yeah, I think he'll be at least that good.
Yeah. So I want to talk about Brash in a second. I want to first, though, ask you about Jackson Kowar. Seems like they really like this dude.
Have for a while now.
And how funny would it be if Jackson Kowar winds up being the best player out of that trade?
Again, it's not a high bar to clear.
Jared Kelenic was worth what, half a win last year? Yes. I think we found out.
The Mariners won the much bemoaned Jared Kelenic trade, whether Kowar pitches for them or not. But it does sound like they seem to be pitching that he's going to be good to go by the end of May, which is going to be interesting. You talked about, this Mariners pitching staff not really having any changeups in it. Apparently Kowar's got a great changeup, and that is the pitch that the Mariners are really excited about from him. So yeah, he's definitely going to factor in here. Again, because we're talking about, very late May, early June at the earliest, you kind of wait and see there, right? You don't want to put any expectations on the guy, and you don't know if he's going to have a setback this late or anything like that. But yeah, the Mariners seem to think that he's the real deal. We'll see how much they want to trust him coming off of Tommy John surgery without really any kind of major league track record of success. So we'll see how much faith they want to put in him and how early they want to do that. But yeah, Kowar was the guy who was turning heads last year. There was a lot of hype around him. And then one day it was just like, oh yeah, he needs Tommy John. And it died. So yeah, Kowar is kind of the X factor here. If he is as good as the Mariners have kind of hyped him up to be, how good the Mariners think he can be, then the Mariners might have 4, 5, 6 high leverage guys in this bullpen. Is he going to be that good? I have doubt, but I am interested to see him pitch. But unfortunately, I mean, I can't imagine we see him in the Cactus League. So you're probably gonna have to make your way down to Tacoma sometime in May before we see him up on the mound again. But yeah, he's definitely an X factor out there.
So you guys know how we feel pretty much about the Matt Brash situation. We've talked about it a bunch on this show. I don't think we need to go too deep into it. I don't know if we've talked on the show since Justin Hollander confirmed that his surgery was to put in the internal brace. So it wasn't actually like a full-on Tommy John surgery.
Right.
So with that information, I am willing to buy in more on the idea that he could come back by the end of April, which is what they're saying right now, and they haven't shifted off of that just yet. He has thrown a few times already down in spring or down in camp, and so far it doesn't seem like he's like reported any issues or anything like that. Like he's been able to, throw another bull. Like the last time that I saw him throw a bullpen, it was like 2 days after he threw his last one. So that seems like a pretty good sign, right? So, what is a realistic and fair expectation for Matt Brash whenever he gets back? If that's at the end of April or, worst comes to worst, it's the All-Star break.
I don't know. I'm not a doctor. So I don't know. Does the brace first? No, I've been very clear about this. Not a doctor, not a lawyer, not a financial expert, but I could fool you into thinking I am one if you need false testimony, which is not legal advice. So the thing with Brash is I don't know if the brace versus the full surgery. I mean, I know that it impacts timeline in terms of returning to the big leagues. I don't know if it impacts the typical post Tommy John return stuff. Because usually it takes guys a year or so to get all their velocity back. They get most of it back pretty quick, but all their velocity, Usually the breaking ball is a little flatter the first year back. And so I don't know if the brace versus that means anything to that degree. But if the Mariners are accurate and Matt Brash is available by, let's say, May 1, if that is accurate, I would still be very hesitant about using Brash in high leverage spots right away. I think you have to build back into that. You have to give him kind of a soft landing. And also we have to keep in mind is that just because Brash is able to pitch like for the Mariners again on May 1st, it probably means it almost certainly means he's not available to pitch on May 2nd and probably not even on the 3rd for the first couple of weeks. I would think they're going to be very cautious with him. So it's going to be a couple of months, I would say, or at least a couple of weeks before they go back to back with him. And then it might be a couple months after his return that they even feel good about going to him in those, those classic Matt Brash spots where you're up 4-2, but the Yankees have runners on second and third. And Aaron Judge is up. You need a strikeout. So you go to Brash. Like they might not give those opportunities to him right away. I think he kind of has to earn his way back into being that high leverage arm. Can he do it? Sure. I mean, obviously we know that he can be a high leverage arm. Yeah. I just don't feel great about the stuff returning and the control returning enough to pencil Brash in as he's definitely going to be a high leverage guy this year. Maybe he might be. I don't want to say he's definitely going to be. I think that's an unfair expectation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and you also have to at least be wary of the possibility of re-injury as well, because it's still going to be a really violent delivery. It's going to put a lot of strain on that elbow. I really think that you need to look at whatever Brash gives you this year as a bonus. Like you can't set any sort of expectation like I'm going to get this version of Matt Brash back, right? If you're the Mariners specifically. So, we'll see. I mean, I hope he comes back and he is Matt Brash. So, the Matt Brash that we know and love. That'd be awesome. But we'll just, that's just a wait and see thing, right? Yeah. So lastly, before we wrap things up, let's put Munoz, Santos, Snyder, and Brash aside here. You have to pick one guy. The rest of the group could be someone that we think is already slated to be part of the bullpen come opening day. Could be one of the pile arms. Who is your one guy that you think could really pop, become a high leverage arm for this team in 2025?
How dare you take away Gabe Spire from me?
I didn't.
Oh, I thought you said Spire, Santos, Brash.
No, I said Snyder.
Oh, yeah, then Gabe Spire.
Mm-hmm. Gabe Spire. All right. Tell me why.
Well, he was that in 2023, and then last year he got hurt. I mean, plain and simple, he got hurt. He wasn't right physically. By all accounts, he's right. This year, he's velocity is fine. He feels good. Last year was a couple of things. He had the elbow thing. I think he had a bit of a knee issue at one point, so he just didn't feel right last year. But I watched the guy in 2023. I know how good the stuff was. He generated a ton of ground balls. He generated a ton of strikeouts, and he's just the guy that I think has the experience plus the stuff. And I think there's a real easy, explanation for why he wasn't that guy last year. He got hurt. He just never could seem to get healthy last year. And sometimes that type of stuff happens. You get over one injury and then something else pops up and you just can't put it all together. So I think the sinker slider Gabe Spire 2023 version is going to be back. And I think he's going to get some big outs for this team, particularly against lefties. And, in a division that features Yordan Alvarez and Corey Seager, like you need some guys who can get these lefties out with some consistency. And I do think that Gabe Spire, and then as an added bonus, not only good against lefties, he's good against righties as well when he's healthy. Yeah. So I think Spire is that guy.
That's a good call. I think it's easy to forget just how good Spire was in 2023. 54 and 2/3 innings pitched, 10.54 Ks per nine, basically a 30% K rate, 181 walks per nine, 55.9% ground ball rate. So he's striking dudes out and he's keeping the ball on the ground at basically an elite level. 3.79 ERA, 3.35 FIP, 2.71 xFIP. 0.6 F4. The only issue with 2023 Spire was that whenever hitters did lift the ball in the air, 20% of those went over the wall.
Right. But if you're striking guys out at a 30% clip and you're getting 55% ground ball,
you're not generating a lot of fly balls.
There's not a lot of fly balls to be had.
Yeah.
You'll take it, right? You'll live with it.
So like you'll see like you see the 20.6% home run to fly ball rate, but then you look at the actual number of home runs that he gave up, it was 7.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not like he can't or shouldn't try to get better at that, but like, it is what it is. I mean, nobody's saying Gabe Spire is an elite reliever, right? I'm saying he's good.
I mean, 10.54 Ks per 9 with a 55.9% ground ball rate from the left side
with a sub 2 base on ball per 9. Like,
that's kind of elite.
It's close. The ERA is a little high, but reliever ERA is out there, right? Because we went to the game log. For all we know, Spire had one outing where he gave up 5 runs, and then it just tanks your ERA for the next 6 months. So. I don't really care about ERA when it comes to relievers. I think strikeout rate, walk rate, ground ball rate, home run to fly ball is something that you should consider. FIP, xFIP. So Spire checks a lot of those boxes. And I think he's going to be healthy this year. So Gabe Spire is now I consider him part of the Mariners high leverage group. Munoz, Brash, hopefully Santos, Spire. To me right now, those are the high leverage arms. But obviously, again, like with Santos, he has to actually do it. Like we have to see it happen before we should just sit here and be like, yes, he's definitely back or anything like that. We got to see it first.
Yeah. I like the Spire call. I'm also going to throw Hunter Cranton out there. We talked about him quite a bit during prospect week last week. So
that was going to be my guy if you had blocked Spire. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I'm surprised he didn't go with Bizzardo.
Yeah, Bizzardo is a guy that obviously I really like. So much so I make up
he's another guy like Kowar, where it's like, all right, on the outside looking in, it's like, why is this guy still in the organization? There were multiple times over the course of 2024, even a little bit in 2023, where I'm like, why is this guy still here? Why is he still on the 40-man roster? Clearly, the Mariners really like him, and we saw a bit of that in September of 2024.
Yes. Let me pull up the numbers here. The corrected numbers.
Yeah. What did you say? It was like 276
over
at bats
his last
or something?
277 batters faced. But it was only after 54 because I was looking at the 162 game average.
Yeah.
On that one line. But all these other numbers are accurate. These are all ratio numbers. So so over his last 54 batters faced, which I think was 16 appearances.
54, you say?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Anyways, in his last, I think it's 16 appearances last year. Opponents slashed 177, 208, 216 against Bizzardo. He had a 1.26 ERA and a 107 FIP. Opponents hit just 167 against the sinker, and his slider saw a whiff rate of 33%. That's a really good pitcher.
Yeah.
That slash line is elite. Right. The whiff rate is really good. It's tough to say any whiff rate's elite when you watch Matt Brash's slider on kind of a daily basis. Kind of spoils it for everybody else. But he's also an elite ground ball guy. And he did finish last year with a 30.6% K rate overall. So him, like Spire, a lot of ground balls, a lot of strikeouts. Can he do it for more than 54 batters? We're going to find out.
So then my last question to you is, if we ask the Mariners this question, who do you think pops? Would their answer be Casey Legumina?
Sure seems like it. There seems to be a lot of Legumina propaganda floating around out there. I think I can give you their off the beaten path answer though.
Sure.
I think they might say Garcia.
Brandon Garcia. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Mariners are gonna have options this year, and they're a little bit more equipped to cover from within any injuries that might pop up. Obviously, you lose Munoz, it's devastating, right?
Yeah.
Like you're just not going to replace that guy. But could they manage to replace Santos for a month if they had to? Yeah, they probably could. They'd survive. It's deeper group, I think it was, than it was last year. But again, last year you lost Brash, Spire, and Santos. basically all at the same time, and you lost them for basically the entire year. Yeah, you could see why they maybe couldn't recover from that level of injury last year. But this year, I think if something like that does happen again, they have more interesting internal options. They're not, it's not like, hey, we have to hope Cody Bolton is what he is, or Hagen Danner. It's like, I mean, we could for a week or two, or we could just go get Garcia, or we could just go get Cranton and ride some actual upside here. So, the bullpen has certainly a higher ceiling, I think, than it did last year. Although injuries has to be a part of the conversation when you talk about the 2024 Mariners bullpen.
All right. So, hey, if you're still watching, let us know in the comments below, who do you think could pop out of this group of arms? Who's your favorite outside of Munoz, Santos, Snyder, and Brash? Let us know down below. Would love to see your answers on that. All right, that's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Titan Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at @LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Titan Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. We're also on Blue Sky. You can follow me at TDG, Colby at MLB Colby, and the show at Locked On Mariners. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.